Griffith's life looks simple when reduced to reruns and nostalgia. A black and white town, a gentle sheriff, a father who always knew the right thing to say. But simplicity was never the truth, it was the product. And Andy Griffith, whether he intended to or not, spent most of his adult life selling emotional certainty while privately wrestling with doubt, fear, and a loneliness that success never cured. He was born Andrew Samuel Griffith in 1926 in Mount Airy, North Carolina, a place that would later be mythologized as Mayberry. But the real Mount Airy of Andy's childhood wasn't charming or comforting. It was poor. It was quiet in the wrong ways. It was a home where emotions weren't processed, only endured. His father struggled with alcoholism, and the instability that followed taught young Andy an early lesson. Safety came from reading people carefully and never becoming a problem yourself. Andy became observant, reserved, controlled. He learned to perform calm even when he didn't feel it. That skill would later make him famous, but it also became the emotional armor he never learned to take off. Music and performance offered him something his home never did: predictable approval. Applause had rules. If you played well, people clapped. If you made them laugh, they liked you. Unlike love, performance had structure. Andy gravitated toward that certainty. Long before Hollywood, he was already shaping himself into someone others found reassuring. When Andy married Barbara Edwards in 1949, he was still an unknown man with modest dreams. Their marriage was built in the trenches of ordinary life, financial uncertainty, small apartments, and shared ambition. Barbara wasn't marrying a future television icon. She was marrying a man who needed grounding, encouragement, and belief. For years, their partnership worked. They built a life together before the world had opinions about Andy Griffith, before executives, critics, and fans began defining him. Barbara knew the private Andy, the anxious one, the self-doubting one, the man who feared he wasn't enough. Then fame arrived, and it arrived fast. When the Andy Griffith Show premiered in 1960, it didn't just succeed, it embedded itself into American identity. Andy wasn't playing a role anymore, he was becoming a symbol. Sheriff Andy Taylor wasn't just a character, he was an ideal. Calm masculinity, moral authority, gentle fatherhood. And once America embraced that image, Andy Griffith lost the freedom to contradict it. Suddenly, everything mattered: his tone, his behavior, his public persona. The stakes weren't just professional, they were moral. He was expected to represent goodness itself. Any deviation felt dangerous. At home, the shift was immediate and devastatingly subtle. Andy became more controlled, more inward. He rationed his emotional energy carefully, spending most of it where it felt safest, on set, where scripts told him exactly what to say and how scenes would end. Barbara felt the distance growing. Conversations became practical rather than intimate. Andy wasn't explosive or cruel, he simply wasn't available. He carried the weight of responsibility like a shield, convincing himself that providing and succeeding were enough. They adopted 2 children, Sam and Dixie, believing that family would anchor them. Instead, it exposed Andy's deepest limitations. He loved his children, but love expressed itself through structure, discipline, and protection, not emotional presence. Dixie grew up watching her father through layers. There was the man at home, quiet and reserved, and there was the man the world saw, warm, attentive, endless patient. The contrast wasn't dramatic enough to be scandalous, but it was confusing enough to shape her understanding of relationships forever. She learned early that her father belonged to everyone, that his warmth was a public resource, that at home he conserved himself. As Dixie grew older, she noticed something unsettling. Strangers spoke to her father with intimacy. They cried, they thanked him, they told him how he helped raise them. Andy listened attentively, offering comfort with ease. Dixie watched, silently absorbing the message. The version of her father people loved most wasn't the one she lived with. This didn't make Andy a bad father. It made him a limited one, a man who never learned how to move freely between performance and vulnerability. By the late 1960s, the emotional gap between Andy and Barbara had widened beyond repair. They lived alongside each other rather than with each other. The marriage didn't implode, it eroded. Years of emotional absence accumulated quietly. When they divorced in 1972, fans were shocked. How could America's favorite dad fail at marriage? But the public was mourning an illusion. The reality had been unraveling for years. Andy felt the divorce as a personal indictment, not just of his marriage, but of his identity. He had failed at the values he represented. He never publicly addressed this shame, but it followed him into every relationship that came next. His second marriage to Solika Kasuto reflected this unresolved tension. Solika was a Greek actress whose world existed largely outside Hollywood's glare. Their relationship was private to the point of invisibility. Different cultures, different rhythms, different emotional languages. Andy seemed to want companionship without exposure, a relationship that wouldn't ask too much of him emotionally. But emotional habits don't change simply because the setting does. The marriage lacked depth and shared life. Long separations became normal. Intimacy remained elusive. When the marriage ended in 1981, it did so quietly. No scandal, no confrontation, just another door closing without ceremony. By this point, Andy's internal struggles were no longer containable. Anxiety intensified. He worried obsessively about aging, relevance, and being discarded by an industry that once adored him. He smoked heavily. His weight fluctuated. He relied increasingly on medication to manage stress. Ironically, the man who symbolized calm was unraveling under the pressure of maintaining it. Within this period, Andy's relationship with his children remained distant but intact. He wasn't estranged, he wasn't absent in the traditional sense, but emotional closeness remained rare. Dixie learned to interpret his silence not as rejection, but as limitation. She adapted rather than confronted. The persistent rumor that Dixie was Andy Griffith's wife illustrates how deeply the public misunderstood his private life. It collapsed family boundaries into sensational myth. Dixie never aggressively corrected the narrative. Her silence was not approval, it was protection. She had no interest in feeding a machine that had already taken so much. Then came Cindy Knight. Cindy entered Andy's life without illusions. She didn't meet a symbol, she met a man who was tired, a man who had spent decades being what others needed him to be. Their relationship worked because it removed expectations rather than added them. Cindy didn't demand emotional transformation. She accepted Andy's rhythms, his quiet, his boundaries. Their marriage, beginning in 1983, became a refuge rather than a stage. As Andy aged, his relationship with fame changed dramatically. He withdrew from interviews, declined awards, avoided nostalgia tours. He didn't want to revisit versions of himself that felt incomplete. The past wasn't comforting, it was exhausting. Privately, he reflected. He acknowledged regret. He wondered what he might have done differently as a husband and father. These weren't public confessions. They were late-night thoughts, quiet admissions shared only with those he trusted. He understood, perhaps too late, that emotional distance leaves marks even when intentions are good, that being admired is not the same as being known, that performance can replace connection if you let it. When Andy Griffith died in 2012, America mourned a father figure, But Dixie mourned a father whose love was real yet restrained, whose presence was reliable yet distant. Her truth isn't accusatory, it's clarifying. Andy Griffith didn't live a secret double life filled with scandal. He lived a divided life, split between responsibility and vulnerability, between performance and selfhood. He gave comfort to millions while quietly rationing it at home, not out of cruelty, but out of fear that he had nothing left to give. And that is where the real story begins, not with rumor, but with understanding.